Hello, my name is Professor John Kelly, and this is the Weber Auto YouTube channel. In this episode, we are going to completely disassemble a 2017 Chevrolet Bolt with a B lithium-ion battery pack. Sitting right here behind me is a 57 kilowatt-hour battery pack from our brand new 2017 Chevrolet Bolt. I have a previous video on removing this battery pack, which was actually pretty simple to do. But now we are going to take the cover off of this thing and completely disassemble it. But before we disassemble this battery, there are a few corrections I need to make to things that I said in the video on removing the battery. Thanks to feedback from viewers like you, there were a few things I realized that I said wrong or were incorrect. So to understand what I said wrong, all we need to do is look at the front of the battery. So over here, this electrical connector on the passenger side of the battery, this small electrical connector, I told you that this is where the battery receives its charge when you plug in the charger. So that is only true if you are using a J1772 compliant level 1 or level 2 charge connector, where it uses AC voltage, either the 120 volt or 208 or 240 volt AC connection from your wall, like you would have at home or at a level 2 public charging station somewhere. If you are at a DC quick charge station, if you have that option on your Bolt, then it will have a DC combo connection, which will have two more wires down below here. And if you look at this picture of a Bolt charge receptacle with DC quick charge and without DC quick charge, you can see the difference there. If you have the DC quick charge option on your vehicle, then the high voltage battery is not charged through that small connector. It is charged through the large 2-wire connector that, when driving down the road, feeds current to the inverter to drive the traction motor. But when you're stopped and in the charge mode, we have current go backwards through those two large high voltage cables to charge the battery. Okay, one clarification that needs to be made as far as a first design Bolt battery or a second design Bolt battery. Apparently, the early releases of the Chevrolet Bolt had one design of a battery. So there's a first design battery, a second design battery. The second design battery went into all Bolts after a certain VIN number. And the way you can tell if you have a first design battery or a second design battery, there's two ways that I've seen that you can tell if your vehicle was made before the vehicle identification number breakpoint where they installed the new battery anyway. One way it would be rather difficult to see, but is the coolant connectors at the front of the battery. Now, I forgot to mention in the battery removal video that I had already removed the undercar cover. There's a great big undercar cover that covers all underneath the traction motor, the steering rack, and the front of the battery with all the electrical connections and the coolant hoses. All of that is fully protected from road salt and debris and everything as you drive down the road. I had taken that cover off. I forgot to mention that. But once that cover is off, then you can see these coolant ports. So right here, the two coolant fittings, the inlet and the outlet. On the first design battery, both ports look like this inlet port on the left. There is not a male outlet port. It's a female outlet port. They're both female connections at the battery itself. So that's one way to tell. I just realized there might be a third way to tell, and that is just simply the label. There's some labels on the battery. If you crawl underneath your vehicle and look at the back of the battery, there's a label back there that says Vista 2.0 on this newer design battery. I don't know what it says on the first design battery. I have not seen the label on one of those, but I suspect it's going to be different than the Vista 2.0. So for what it's worth, there's two design batteries. If you have an early design battery, be aware that you may have an issue where it reports greater range than you actually have, and you might actually run out of range while driving unexpectedly. It'll suddenly drop. If it were mine, I'd be visiting a dealer to see what the policy is on installing a new design battery for you. All right, well, enough of the corrections and clarifications. Let's take this thing apart. All right, the first step of disassembling this battery is to take the cover off. There are 50 bolts that hold the cover on, and then there's a seal in between there. I'm going to take the bolts out without any protective personal equipment, and then I'm going to get my personal protective high voltage gloves on and get somebody to help me lift this cover off, because from that point forward, everything inside of here is high voltage. It doesn't matter if we've removed the service plug or not, because all that does is protect us from getting shocked outside the battery housing. Once we open this up, it's high voltage all the time, everywhere. I'm going to use an electric impact gun to remove these bolts because it's fast, but I am not going to just give it full throttle and rip the bolts out one by one. When you use an impact gun on anything, you need to back the bolts out really slowly, just in case a thread starts to get pulled and damage some threads. So let me get these taken out, and then we'll get the cover removed. There are 6 bolts that hold the cover around the service plug connector. Just take the whole thing because I'm sure it's not very heavy. So let's. Okay, straight up, over. You got it? Okay. Nice. All right, while you're here, let's see if this seal, let's take the seal off. Keep it over there too. Cool. Okay, we've got the cover off of this monster. It's quite beautiful to see inside. Let's take a look around inside this battery before we disassemble anything. Okay, starting here at the front of the battery, we can see the 2 coolant connections. And if we look inside, you can see some coolant hoses going to different coolant plates that are underneath the batteries, it appears. There are 5 battery sections and 10 battery modules in this battery. The large high voltage connector right here comes in, and this big assembly right here is where all the high voltage contactors, the pre-charge contactor, the pre-charge resistor, the charge contactors, I believe, are in there. We'll get that apart and see that. We can see another coolant line going down to a coolant plate. We can see the 2 low voltage connections coming in on this black harness that goes over to the battery energy control module, I believe. So anything in black tape is typically low voltage. Any of these orange bus bars here are the high voltage connections. You can see one battery section right here where it has, on this half is one battery module, that half is the other battery module. I believe you have to replace the entire battery section. rather than an individual module, but we'll look deeper into that as we go. So there's 2 battery sections, 3 battery sections, and then back here we have 2 battery sections stacked on top of each other with the battery energy control module at the top, monitoring all of the individual cell voltages, the temperatures of the batteries, and so on. Here in the back of the battery, we can see the lower coolant plate and a hose going to the upper coolant plate on the stacked sets of battery sections. So we've got 1, 2, 3 coolant hoses going up to different coolant plates on the upper battery section. We've got our high voltage disconnect connector right here that takes our high voltage battery and from what I saw in the service manual schematic, splits the battery in half. So we take a 350.4 volt battery and divide it in half. So now we have 2 175.2 volt batteries electrically inside here. All right. And coming around the other side, just more of the same, it appears. There is a special service tool that goes with the engine hoist that will grab each battery section and lift it out once we get it disconnected. All right, I've got my insulated tools. We are going to start disassembling. Anytime I disassemble anything, the way I stay organized is I use Ziploc bags, the heavy-duty freezer bags, to keep everything together. Any piece I take off, the piece, the bolts, they all go in a bag and typically get labeled so that later on, even if it's a year down the road, when I put something back together, there's no confusion about what goes where. Okay, so we pulled off the electrical connector for the large 2-wire connection at the battery. As you can see here, we have the high voltage terminals sticking out that did not come off with the connector. Okay, now that I've got the contactor cover off, or the relay assembly cover off, I can take off the AC charging connector at the relay. I will put those nuts back so we know where they go. Then we've got 4 bolts that hold the connector to the housing. All right, here is our charge cable when you use the AC powered charger with the positive and negative terminals marked right there. Okay, our next step is to remove the relay assembly, or contactors as I like to refer to them. To remove this relay assembly, I've got to remove these 2 terminals in the front that went to our large electrical connection. And then we've got 2 bus bars that connect the entire battery pack to the relay center. So we'll undo the bus bars. So this is our positive terminal, and that makes this the positive bus bar and the overall positive terminal of the entire battery. And then the lower terminal here is our negative, and that makes this the overall negative terminal of the entire battery pack. So all 350.4 volts, which is the nominal voltage. It'll be higher than that when it's fully charged, lower than that when it's discharged. But that's at 3.65 volts per cell, the nominal voltage. We have the negative terminal, we have the negative contactor, we have the positive terminal, the positive contactor, we have the pre-charge contactor, the pre-charge resistor, and then I believe this one is the charger. When we plug in the charger, we have to have a contactor to connect the charger to the battery positive also. So now we need to take these bus bars off, the two bus bars, the negative bus bar right here and the positive bus bar right there, before we can take out the relay center. To remove these bus bar covers, there's just some little tabs on the side. We just come in with an insulated screwdriver, pop out the tab on each side, and flip open the little lid so we can get to the bolt. We're going to need this bus bar off also. There we go. And we'll break those nuts loose. A few hold down bolts for the relay assembly. We can't get to one of the hold down bolts for the relay assembly without taking this bus bar off here. Get that out of the way. So here's our negative, essentially the negative cable of the overall battery to the relay assembly. Take this bus bar off. This bus bar connects in series one battery module with another one. And then our positive bus bar comes off next. That's essentially the positive battery cable for the entire battery right there. And we've got two more bolts, two more nuts that hold the relay center or the relay assembly down. So now we'll take off all the nuts that hold the relay center to the bottom tray here. I believe that's all the nuts. And then we have, looks like, one electrical connector right here. It has a white terminal position assurance or connector position assurance clip. Slide that back, pinch down, unplug it. And now I think we can just lift the whole relay center up and out. A lot of pieces in here, big heavy contactors, current sensors, and so on. We will look at this in more detail in a little bit. There's a fuse here also. To see what is serviceable. Do you have to replace the entire unit, or can you go in and replace individual pieces like you can in the Chevrolet Volt? We'll find that out. But for now, let's get this out of the way. Okay, before we continue disassembly of the battery, I finally received the adapters I needed to drain the coolant out of the coolant plate that cools these battery sections. Now, just for clarification, the cooling system on the Chevrolet Bolt battery uses the General Motors DexCool coolant. That's the same coolant that they use for their radiators for their engine systems. It's the same coolant that's used in the other two reservoirs on this Chevrolet Bolt, one for the traction motor and the other one for the power electronics cooling. So there are three different cooling systems on this Bolt. They all use the same GM DexCool coolant. Okay, the special service tool to remove the coolant, which I already had for the Chevrolet Volt battery, is the Kentmore vac and fill system, but it uses some special adapters to connect to the battery on this Chevrolet Bolt. Okay, so there are two coolant hoses hooked to the battery. We have the inlet here on the left, the outlet on the right. there are two adapters to connect our vacuum tank to the battery. We've got one adapter here that goes in the inlet. We're not going to put the adapter on the outlet yet. The inlet has a quick connect fitting that allows our vacuum tool to come in and connect. And then we use shop compressed air. We run the compressed air across a little venturi, it creates a vacuum, and if there's any coolant left in this battery, we will see it come through this hose right here. And the procedure is to turn on the valve and let the vacuum pull what coolant it can out of the battery until there's a fine mist. And then we will use the other adapter here to plug the outlet and let vacuum build up in the coolant plate, and then remove the plug, and that surge of air coming in is supposed to blow out any remaining coolant that's still in the coolant plate. And we're supposed to repeat that several times until we have gotten out as much coolant as we can. Okay, let's turn on this vacuum valve and see what happens. This is going to be noisy. Here comes the coolant. Okay, we'll stop there for a minute and see if our tank is full. Yeah, it's pretty close. Let me drain it a little bit here. This system holds 7.1 liters of coolant, a lot more than I expected. All right, let's run the vacuum a little bit more. Okay, now we plug the outlet. We'll let vacuum level build up inside the coolant plate. Then we'll pull off this plug and we'll expect to see more coolant come out of here. There we go. Got a whole bunch. Do it again. Pull it off again. Got some more coming out. Since we keep getting spurts of coolant out of there, I think that the battery must be tilted back a little bit. I'm going to tilt it on its holding table a little bit forward now. So I tilted the front end down just a little bit. See if that'll help get the rest of it out. All right, on the back of this tool here, we have graduated measurements, and when it was sitting flat on the ground, it showed that we had approximately 3.8 liters of coolant, additional coolant that we got out of this battery. So that means out of the 7.1 liters of coolant total, 3.8 was still in the battery. That leaves 3.3 liters that we got out when we drained the coolant out of the pump, the reservoir, the hoses, and what would come out of the battery when we disconnected the inlet and the outlet hoses underneath the vehicle. So that's a pretty good amount of coolant to get back out. All right, well, we had to drain that coolant next, because the step after this is to undo these coolant hoses inside, and we don't want coolant running all over inside the battery. So we got out as much as we could without spending all day there pulsing the system vacuum. So let's proceed with disassembly. Okay, now that most of the coolant has been drained out of the battery coolant plate in the bottom of this housing, we can disconnect the hoses that connect the cooling plate to the two fittings on the front of the battery here. They are a very large nut. The socket that I have that fits that is a 1 5/8 inch. And then I'll hold the inside fitting from rotating with a screwdriver. Okay, that one's loose, and that one's loose. So here's the big nut for the inlet, and another nut just like it for the outlet. Okay, so here's our first. This is our outlet hose. Here's one of the inlets. You have to pull up on the hose and then squeeze in on some tabs. I can't reach the tab on the inside. I can reach it on the outside. So I'm using an insulated screwdriver on the inside. And we've got a bracket that holds that down. And here's our hose. Lost a little bit of coolant. All right, I better clean up that coolant before I track it all over the place. When you're working with high voltage personal protective equipment, it needs to be kept dry. We don't want to have coolant coating the gloves or any of the tools because it can become conductive. I don't see any more drips in the battery housing. Okay, our next step is to remove these battery modules. I want to start with battery modules 4 and 5 in the very back of the battery here. This is battery module 1 right here, 2, 3, 4 is on the bottom in the back, and then 5 is on the top. We are going to take off battery module 5 with the battery energy control module BECM on the top and our service disconnect lever connector our harness, and then undo the bolts that hold the battery modules in and take them out one by one. So let's move to the back of the battery. Okay, to remove any of these battery modules, one of the first steps it tells us to do is to remove the wire harness that connects the battery energy control module to each of the battery cells through these orange wires here. These are the individual voltage monitoring of each battery cell pack. There's actually 3 battery cells welded in parallel in each cell pack. Then we also have in this black wire harness here the low voltage electrical connections, and we're to undo those also. But there's a warning, a very specific warning that's very much like the Chevrolet Volt battery energy control module warning, and that is don't disconnect anything out there wire harness wise without disconnecting the BECM first. And the reason for that is the BECM is in charge of balancing the individual cells. And if you unplug the wrong wire harness at the wrong time, the BECM, which receives its power from these batteries, can be tricked into thinking there's an imbalance, and it can try to balance something that can't be balanced, and it can actually cause internal damage and would have to be replaced. So there are 8 electrical connectors on this BECM. They must be undone in a specific order. This electrical connector right here, the low voltage one, is the first one. So it has a little connector position assurance clip we pull out, and then a tab, and unplug it. Number 2 is the other low voltage one on the other side, which is just like that one. Connector position assurance clip, pull down, and unplug. Now, one thing you need to understand about the bolt with a B battery here is that everything on the driver's side of the battery is mirrored on the passenger side of the battery, with the exception of the BECM. So the battery cells, the wire harness, everything on this side looks the same as this side. All right, so then we disconnect. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's get these undone next. I don't want to pull on the wires themselves. We want to pull on the connector. Connector position assurance clip, press the release tab, and then get the connector out. Okay, and then on this side, this is 6, 7, and 8 in that order. So we'll undo the connector position assurance clip on each one of those first. And then depress the locking tab and rock out the connector. Just like that. Now with the BECM disconnected, we can disconnect all of the orange and black harnesses on each side of the battery. So I'm going to do that next. All right, we will start with the low voltage harness, the black harness here. In that harness, we have the 2 low voltage connections at the front of the battery. We have a temperature sensor at the end of most of these battery modules. And then we have some press-in tabs that hold the harness in a bracket. So I believe we just squeeze in and pull up on the thermistors, temperature sensors for the battery. We'll carefully rock out the harness clip. I'll get the high voltage one while we're here. And we need some Torx bits for that. Looks like there are 4 number 20 Torx bit head screws that hold the low voltage harness to the battery case. Okay, so here's our low voltage harness, the 2 electrical connections at the front of the battery. Bring that back here. Now we will disconnect the high voltage monitoring circuits. They have a terminal position assurance clip, or connector position assurance clip. Okay, I've got, on the driver's side, I've undone the high voltage battery cell monitoring circuits here for all 5 modules, battery modules on the driver's side. There's 5 more on the other side. So we'll set that off to the side and go get that side done, the passenger side. This side's going a little faster, now I know what I'm doing. The first time you take anything apart, it's a learning process. Even as good as the service information instructions are, it's not the same as being there doing it. Temperature sensor, another temperature sensor. And one more. Now the harness retainers. All right, we've almost got everything removed harness wise. Just a few more retainers. All right, here's our high voltage harness for the driver's side. Low voltage harness. Here's our high voltage harness for the passenger side. Chassis ground for the BECM. Our low voltage side. The only connector left on the low voltage side now is the high voltage interlock circuit that's part of the electrical service disconnect lever. So we'll remove that next. All right, we just have 2 10mm nuts that connect the driver's side of the battery pack to the passenger side of the battery pack through the service disconnect lever. And then up comes our service disconnect with the low voltage harness. So even though this is the high voltage disconnect, there is a low voltage harness right here, this black wire, that connects to it, that monitors on that white connector in there, on those 2 terminals, to see if the service disconnect lever has been unplugged. And if it has been unplugged, then the entire system is disabled and the vehicle will not operate. All right, our next step is to remove the battery energy control module. Just has a couple little tabs. Hold it in place. And then it pulls out. Okay, the next step of the disassembly is to undo all of these orange bus bars. These bus bars connect the positive terminal of one battery module to the negative terminal of the next battery module and put them all in series all the way around until we get the 350.4 volt nominal voltage, not fully charged battery. So battery section 1 and 3 are the same part. You could interchange those if necessary. Battery section 2 is flipped around backwards, and it's a different part number. Battery sections 4 and 5 are different part numbers, and they have fewer cells in them. They're a little bit narrower. Down here, these 3 battery sections, we have 6 battery modules, each rated at 5.94 kilowatt hours. The 2 battery sections in the back, I don't know their kilowatt hour rating yet. It appears that on the driver's side of those 2 back battery sections, that the right-hand side of those is the same length, same number of cells, and probably 5.94 kilowatt hours on the driver's side. But the passenger side is significantly narrower. It's missing, I believe, well, I don't know how many. We'll find out. It's either 1 or 2 cell packs, and a cell pack is 3 cells wired in parallel with each other. So we will get these orange bus bars off next, then get the shield or get the brackets off of the battery in the back there, the battery modules, and then we can see what the rating is and loosen up all the brackets that hold these modules in place one at a time and lift them out with a special lifting fixture. So let's get these bus bars off next. By the way, the shiny top and bottom to these battery packs is a heat transfer piece of material. It's probably aluminum, since aluminum is such a good thermal conductor, but I don't know for sure. I'll have to see if a magnet sticks to it. But it's that way underneath where it contacts the coolant plate to transfer the heat out of the battery cells. Okay, our next step is to remove the brackets that hold battery section number 5 here onto the battery section 4 bracket and the lower case. Okay, we got the 2 rear brackets off. Now we do the front brackets. All right, I'm going to lift the cover off of this upper battery section, section number 5, and then we can finally see what the kilowatt hour rating is on the smaller battery section over there. All right, just as I suspected, the longer half of battery module 5 is the same 5.94 kilowatt hour rating of the battery sections 1 through 3. However, the shorter section over here is rated at 4.75 kilowatt hours. And the battery module number 4 below it has the shorter section on the driver's side, the longer section on the passenger side. That means for those of you who insist this is a 60 kilowatt hour rated battery, the labels disagree with you. So that means that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 battery modules at 5.94 kilowatt hours. So 5.94 times 8 gives us 47.52 kilowatt hours. And then we have 2 at 4.75, which gives us 9.5 kilowatt hours. And if we add that to the previous calculation, then that gives us exactly 57.02 kilowatt hours. So I don't know where the 60 kilowatt hour rating came from. It's clearly marked as 57 on the cover. You add up the battery modules and it's 57 exactly. Okay, well, enough about the kilowatt hour ratings. Now we have some bolts on each side that hold the battery module down, and then we can lift up this battery module and see the coolant plate below it and see the heat transfer plates on the bottom that I predict look just like these ones here on the top. Okay, so 3 bolts here on the left, 3 more bolts on the right, and now we're ready to lift it off. Okay, we're ready to bring in the battery lifting crane and attachment to pull it up. The service information tells us that as we lift this battery section up, that we need to go slowly because it has a sticky compound where it connects to the thermal plate. I imagine it's some sort of a heat sink compound. It just says it's sticky. We'll see why it's sticky. I guess I just assume it's a heat sink compound, but maybe not. Let's find out. Okay, this is the official Bolt battery section lifter. The Bolt, as we've seen, has 2 different widths of battery sections. So this battery section 5 here that we're going to lift off has some holes right here and right here that the little fingers on the end of this lifting fixture are going to come in and grab. But I need to move it in a notch first. Right there. This center piece right here that slides back and forth has a little lip on it, and it's going to slide into this hole right here somewhat near the middle of the battery. So that needs to be on the other side, so I'm going to rotate around the battery lift for the moment, and then we'll let it down and get it connected. I got it hooked on this one side. On the passenger side, let's slide this center fixture over, let it down a little more, slide that center over a little more, and then down some more. So we've got quite a gap over here, so we'll have to adjust the width of the tool. Looks like it's got to go into the innermost one on this side, but I've got to let it down just a little bit more. Okay, we've got the battery section lift connected on the driver's side, the passenger side, in the center. I need to snug up that center, keep it from sliding, lock the center fixture in place, and now we are ready to lift. Okay, now a concern when lifting here is that, remember, this is a 1,000 pound battery. So if there are 5 sections and they were all equal, which they're not, these 2 were a little bit lighter, we are taking out somewhere near 200 pounds. And of course the bracketry and the bottom housing are included in that 1,000 pounds. So that means when I lift this up, since this battery is balanced on the center of gravity on this holding table, that the battery could tip forward. Well, we don't want it to tip forward, of course. I'm going to get some stools to put under the corners of the battery. Okay, here's my logic here with the stools. This battery weighs 1,000 pounds. If I put 4 stools one under each corner. That's only 250 pounds per stool. These stools can easily hold a 250-pound person. And we're not going to put the whole weight of the battery on it. We're just going to put a little bit on there to keep it from tipping as we lift out these battery sections. So I think we'll be just fine. I'm going to lift up. Okay, then we'll come down. All right, I've got the stools installed under the four corners of the battery. Let's lift this section up and out of here. Okay, here we go. Lifting slowly. I can hear some popping as it's releasing from the thermal plate below. We'll lift it up a little bit more. There it's coming. A little bit more. Aha. So there's not a heat sink compound. It's a mat that's under there. Our center fixture there appears to be bowing just a little bit. I must not have it snugged up enough. The bottom of the battery looks just like the top of the battery as far as the heat sink material. Okay, we are going to sit battery section number 5 down on my workbench here. I'm going to readjust this tool here in the middle. See if that helps any. Yeah, a little bit. Okay, with battery section 5 removed, we can see the coolant plate, sort of, except it's covered with this sticky, I'm sure it's a thermal transfer material. I don't know what that is. I will need to investigate in the service information about reinstalling the battery section, as far as, do you need to replace this, or is it reusable as long as it's not damaged? What's the story there? I need to find that out. The battery section below it, battery section number 4, is just like the one that we took off, except it's flipped around backwards. Now let's go look at the battery section that we removed. Okay, we've got battery section number 5 here that has 2 battery modules in it. I don't know their battery module numbers yet. I need to look those up. But the battery module on the driver's side has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 heatsink bars. And on the passenger side, it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 3 battery packs, which are 3 battery cells welded in parallel with each other, fewer, is what it appears to be. Let's take a voltage measurement on these. .56 volts on the driver's side module. So positive to negative 32.45. Now this battery, we fully charged it before we took it apart, which you're not supposed to do. We've got a battery discharger, balancer, charger system that we've got coming that will discharge the battery down to a lower voltage level before you do service work on it or before you dispose of it. But this one is fully charged, and so I still need to investigate to see how many battery cells and battery packs, and a pack once again is 3 cells welded together in parallel with each other, are in here. I know that there are 96 total battery packs in the entire battery, 288 cells, but there are 3 cells welded in parallel, as I've said several times. So that is the battery module number 5. It appears to have a stud that goes all the way through the length of the battery, 2 studs on each side, very much like the Chevrolet Volt battery, made by LG also. And I can't see, but it looks like there's just some covers that might be removable. The connections between battery packs, I will investigate that further. Once again, the bottom of the battery looks just like the top of the battery. I can't tilt that and show you. It's too heavy for me to do that, but maybe when we put it back on, we can look underneath. One more thing, I did check in the service information, those sticky battery pads, the heat transfer pads, are not reusable. You must take them off and then put new ones on and make sure there are no bubbles in them when you reinstall them. So I will see if I can get those from the local Chevrolet dealer or not. It'll be interesting to see. Okay, we're ready to remove the rest of the battery sections. Battery sections 1, 2, 3, and 4. And before I remove the bolts to remove those sections, I just wanted to show you one more time the voltage on these batteries. So right here, from negative to positive, I have 40.58 volts. There are 10 battery cell packs in here of 3 battery cells welded in parallel together per pack, fully charged around 4 volts each. So that gives us our 40 volts. The battery section in the back, the 2 battery sections in the back of the battery, sections 5 and 4, they have a shorter section that has 8 battery cell packs in it, and it has a fully charged voltage of 32 volts, as we saw on the bench. So what that means is we are no longer dealing with dangerous voltages. I can come in and touch positive to negative, and there's nothing. Big deal. However, the proper service procedures, which I always recommend that you follow, tell us to keep our personal protective equipment, our gloves on, get rid of watches and any other jewelry we may have on, and keep that personal protective equipment on as we finish working on this battery, taking these out. So I'm going to put the gloves back on. I've already tested them for leaks. By the way, it is against OSHA regulations to use these gloves without a leather outer glove, except for one time. You can use them one time without the leather outer glove, and then you have to have them recertified right after that. So always keep your leather outer gloves on, your high voltage class 0 gloves. And that's because without any protection over them, you could cut them and render them useless immediately. Okay, so we've got 3 bolts on the side of each battery section. So 6 bolts total on the sides, and then 6 bolts in the front, 6 bolts in the back of each battery section. So I'm going to remove those bolts right now, and let's take out battery section number 1. Okay, we'll take our front bracket off. Oh, I forgot there's 2 center bolts we got to take out. Actually, they're nuts on studs. Another bracket. 3 bolts on the right side. 3 bolts on the left. And then this bracket that holds down both battery modules, or battery sections 1 and 2, comes out. It does not appear, yes it does, to be directional. It has a little hook right there, a little tab, so it has to go back in a certain direction. Looks like the tab is right here, so the tabs were facing inward on the passenger side, also inward on the driver's side. And then the last remaining nut on that center section, right there. Okay, it's time to bring in the battery lifting fixture and crane. This time I'm going to put the fixture on the battery first and then connect the crane to the fixture. Should be a lot easier. I don't know why I didn't think of that before. Now the big challenge with this fixture, as we saw in removing battery section 5, is that we do not want that battery section tilting when we lift it up and get it out of the bottom housing here. We don't want it touching other battery terminals or touching other batteries as it comes up. So we need to try to get that as centered or balanced as possible. However, the tool, the eyelet of the tool, is not centered in this black bar. It's 12 inches from the one side and 14 inches from the other side. So it looks like this is the short side here. So I've compensated by sticking the green bar out a little farther on this side than on this side. And then we also need to make sure that this center fixture that hooks into the middle of the battery here is able to hook into it. So looks like we need to bring it out 1 notch on this side, right there, and then bring it out another notch, so it will be 2 notches out on this side, just like that. So we've got 2 exposed notches over here. We've only got 1 over here. We can put this middle holding fixture right up in that centerpiece there. As I learned last time, this really needs to be clamped down tight or it tilts. So either I was using it incorrectly or it needs to be improved, the design of that center portion. All right, so now we've got the eyelet centered over the middle of the battery. We're ready to come in with the hoist and pick it up, and hopefully that will give us a balanced pick up of this battery section. Now remember, under the battery we have that sticky coolant pad. I did some research on that and I found out that you are always supposed to replace that. They cost around $30 per pad. There's 2 of them. They just peel right up. They're not super sticky, but they are sticky. I'm trying to order some from our local Chevrolet dealer. Everything's on parts order restriction right now, and so I'm waiting to see if we can even purchase them before I peel off and possibly ruin the previous ones. We won't put it together until I can get some new ones, but it may be a little while on the parts before I can put it back together and put it back in the vehicle, because this needs to work again. All right, let's bring that crane in. Okay, let's lift it up. All right, we will bring it up slowly so that we can release that adhesive. There we go. And that looks a lot better. It's balanced. Looks like I need to pull the crane back just a little bit. There we go. Nice, that looks a lot better. So I believe the mistake I made with the holding fixture before was not putting it on the battery first. I should have done that, because that center holding fixture seems to be holding just fine. So that was my mistake. All right, let's put this over on the table with the other one. All right, we'll get ready to lift the next battery. Get the center piece hooked in. Okay, with battery section 1 removed, you can see the white sticky heat transfer pads that transfer the heat out of the battery into the cooling plate underneath those coolant pads. So now let's take out the next battery section. We'll have the 3 bolts on each side, the center bolts, and then the 6 bolts that are common between it and the next battery. All right, we'll bring our crane back over. All right, let's lift up battery section number 2. Let's take that over to the table. Okay, we're ready to take out battery section number 3. Okay, to get battery section 3 out, we have to undo the brackets that hold it in place, but they're a shared bracket with battery section number 4. So to get that one out, we have to take off the coolant plate on the top here for battery section 5, and to get to that to be able to remove that, we have to be able to pull off the battery heat transfer mat. So you'll notice here I can just grab it and peel it up. I'll try to save it so that it doesn't get ruined. That gives us access to the nuts that hold it in place. There's a small side and a large side. Now I can get to the 3 nuts that hold the coolant plate in for battery section 5. We will have to undo some hose clamps here to get that off before we can take this upper bracket off, before we can take the brackets off that hold in battery section number 3. So let's get these nuts loose. That should free up our battery coolant plate. Let me get some pliers and we'll get those hoses disconnected. It looks like the upper ones might be easier to disconnect. Now the tricky part here, as with any coolant hose, is the hose probably wants to stick to the aluminum fitting that it hooks on. And we have to be real careful not to break that fitting off, or we'll have to replace the coolant plate that it hooks to. The upper coolant plate only has 3 connections and is rather small, so if I break it, it'll be a lot less expensive to replace than the gigantic bottom piece. So we'll see if we can get those loosened up here. So now we'll just loosen them up one by one. Okay, for the first time ever, let's take off this coolant plate and see what it looks like. Big piece of aluminum. Get our 3 coolant fittings here. And then you can see the channels of how the coolant flows through the coolant plates. Let's see if I remember right. The inlet is the 2 outer ones, and the outlet is the center one. So, cooling plate, battery section number 5. Oh. And it has coolant in it. Oh, that was dumb. Okay, with that cooling plate out of the way, we can lift up this insulating pad. It feels retained by something. Looks like it was just held down with a little piece of double-sided tape right there. Insulator to reflect the heat away from, to keep the heat from battery section 4 from getting into section 5, and 5 from getting into section 4. Okay, now that we've got the coolant pads, the coolant plate, and the insulator out of the way, we're finally down to this upper bracket over battery section 4 that we have to remove to get these center brackets out to remove battery section 3. Alright, is that it for that upper plate? Or have we got one more hidden somewhere? I think that's it. Get these nuts put away. So I think we can just lift off this bracket now. Yeah. Okay. This bracket is really thick. Has some foam pads on the back between the battery section 4 and the bottom of the bracket. So we want to keep that clean and dry. Now I think we can lift out our 2 brackets, holding down battery section 3 and battery section 4. It looks like these have the little tabs facing outward rather than inward, like the previous 2 sets we've removed. Let me just double check. I believe we've got everything out. All the bolts out to get battery section 3, which is identical to battery section 1, out. Although battery section 2 may look just like battery section 1 and 3, it actually has opposite polarity terminals on it that allows the batteries to be put in series with each other on the left side of the battery housing and the right hand side of the battery housing. So never get those mixed up. Always mark which section is which, double check the polarity so that we always have positive going to negative with those big bus bars. All right, let's bring the crane in and get battery section 3 out of there. Okay, let's take it up. Taking it up slowly, letting the sticky battery pads release. All right, we're down to our last battery section, section 4 here. It has a bracket that goes up to hold modules, or it has a bracket that goes up to hold section 5 in place on each side that we have to remove, and then it has the same 3 bolts on each side and 2 brackets on the back with 3 bolts each that hold it in place, and 1 center bolt. So let's 2 center bolts. Let's get those off and get that last module, get that last section out of there. All right, on this outer bracket that holds battery section 5 in place, there is one more electrical connector, and what it is an extension harness for the cell voltage monitoring circuits. It just goes from this outer bracket over to the side of the battery like the rest of the batteries had. And so I need to take that off of this bracket before I can remove it on each side. It just has a couple of push-in retainers that will pop out. So now you can see the high voltage sensing lines and the 3 bolts that hold this side of the battery down. So we'll get those out next. We do not need to remove the high voltage cell sensing lines. Right hand bracket. And then the last 3 bolts holding the battery down. All right, let's get the battery removing tool on there and get this battery section 4 out. And then we can get those cross braces out of there and the gigantic cooling plate in the bottom of the battery. And then we're done disassembling this battery. All right, it looks like I was wrong. We do need to remove these high voltage cell sensing lines to allow the battery lifting fixture to come in and get into the holes where it needs to be. So we've got 2 harness retainers, 2 connector position assurance clips. All right. There's our left hand high voltage sense harness for battery section 4. Here's the other 2 harness retainers. And here's our harness for the other side. Okay, let's get this holding fixture in here as centered as possible. We've got the lifting fixture eyelet centered across the battery length, but remember, since we've got a short side of the battery and a long side of the battery for sections 4 and 5, it's not going to be over this black section that was in the middle of sections 1, 2, and 3. It's going to be off to the side here. So I think that's as balanced as we can be. There is not another hole over here to scoot. Oh, but there is over here. We could scoot the whole thing over 1 more notch. I've got to get a ruler or a tape measure and see. Okay, from the outside edge to the eyelet, I've got 17 inches on the one side and 17 on the other. That's That's what you need to have. It's got to be equally centered in there, or the battery will tilt like section 5 did when I first took that up. I must have had it off one notch in the wrong direction. Okay, let's bring in the crane and get that up and out of there. Okay, let's bring it up. Okay, here it comes. You can see it lifting the whole battery tray up with it. We no longer have the weight of an additional battery section to hold it down and take it off of the battery pad. So we'll let it sit there and do its thing. I can hear a lot of popping. Okay, we'll bring it up just a little bit more. There we go. All right, I've lifted the battery section up pretty high so you can see underneath it. Let's take a look. Okay, as you can see there, the bottom of the battery looks just like the top of the battery. It's got those big aluminum heat sinks that make contact with the coolant pads. All those white cooling pads that transfer the heat into the cooling plate down below it. So now we are going to remove those 4 cross braces and then the cooling plate, and then we will have the battery completely gutted and disassembled as far as we can go, with one exception, possibly the relay center. I'm pretty sure that if it's anything like the Chevrolet Volt with a V, that the contactors are serviceable. You can replace those, but we will find out. I do not know for sure. So let me get this battery out of the way and we'll get the rest of this disassembled. Alright, there's our last battery section. Just put that over here with the others. Okay. We are ready to take those 4 braces out of there. It looks like the 2 middle ones are the same. And the 2 outside ones are different from all of them. The one with the 2 studs in a row is in the front. The one with the offset studs is in the rear. I better mark those. All right. This will be number 1. I'll put an arrow pointing forward. 2. 3. And 4. All right, so there are 2 bolts apiece holding those down. Nope, just the back 3. The first one only has 1. So let's get those out of there. Okay. take those out of there. They appear just to be steel braces. Okay. Number 3. Number 2. And number 1. As you can see, with them close together, different stud configurations, different holes. Okay, we are just about done. We have to take off this coolant plate next. Looks like we've got a nut right there. Two nuts right there. Two more right there. Only one on that one. Got a few in the middle. Got one right there. Two off to the side. Two more. And one more. And I think that's it. And the last one, unless I've missed one, we are ready to attempt to lift out the coolant plate in the bottom of this battery housing. I think I've got all the bolts out. I am sure that it still has coolant in it. Now I want to avoid, if at all possible, getting or spilling any coolant in this housing, because it has some, what looks like some complex bracketry that's all welded together with some passages in there, and it would be difficult to get that out of there. So, alright, I'm going to try to get it out myself. I've plugged the holes on the other side. Put this box under here. This box under here. Plug this hole. Okay, my plan to get this coolant plate off is to just slide it towards the front, tip it right off the edge here, and let it finish draining in the bucket, the box that I used to drain the cooling system initially when I took the battery out of the vehicle. So let's see how that goes. Tip it up and pull the plug. There's barely anything coming out. And of course, that's the outlet side. I can see the inlet side over here, the rag getting a little wet, so it obviously has some coolant still in it, but overall I'm impressed. That vacuum removal procedure got out a pretty good amount, other than what was in that upper plate below battery section 5 that I spilled on myself. This looks pretty good. I'm going to turn this around so you can see the other side now. Here is the coolant plate. At the top here is the back. We're looking at the bottom of the coolant plate 4 battery sections, 1 at the bottom here, 2, 3, and 4. There we go. Now we can see the entire coolant plate from underneath. I'm just going to set it on some shop stools, get it out of the way. Okay, here we go. Nice. Okay, we are down to just the insulated pads underneath the coolant plate. I'm sure that their purpose is to keep the cold or hot from outside the vehicle or under the vehicle from affecting the battery temperature inside. This is a closed system, active cooling system, heating system for the battery, and we want to avoid all outside interference if possible. So those are the last pieces to be removed. Obviously this is number 4. Three, the arrow pointing forward. Be hard to mix up number 4. Number 3, 2, and 1. So let's see if we can lift those out of there, or if they're held down with tape. Feels like the tape. Have to come in with a long screwdriver and help it out. Double-sided tape holding it down. There we go. So there's number 1. There's the tape. Number 2. Those look identical. 3. Also identical. And number 4. Which is unique. Okay, there is one last part that has to come off, and then we're done with this disassembly video. And that is the housing for the large 2-wire electrical connector right here. So we've just got 4 bolts. Here's the housing. It's got a nice weather seal on it. And that's it. That's the last part. We have totally gutted the 2017 Chevrolet Bolt with a B battery. We've taken apart everything that can be taken apart that I'm aware of. Now, it's going to take me a little while to get the parts and the thermal pads and do a few other things as far as research before I'm ready to put this back together. But I will shoot another video on the reassembly because always it's easier to take something apart than it is to put it back together. So as much work as this was the easy part. So I've got a lot more studying and research to do. Of course, I like to label everything and take things apart I'm not supposed to take apart. So we'll see what can be and cannot be taken apart, what can and cannot be serviced in addition to what we've taken apart here. Just out of curiosity's sake, I want to see how heavy this battery tray is, the lower tray here. Oh man, it's very heavy. Several of you on my other video on removing the bolt battery, we're concerned that this was just flimsy, and it's made of some pretty thick steel, and very heavy. I'm surprised at how heavy it is. I can barely budge it, and I'm not a strong man anymore, but I can't move it. All right, well, it's been quite an adventure. Thanks for enjoying it with me. Have a good day.